The cold bite of the Montana winter had finally released its grip on independence, but Kaleb Steele still felt frozen to his core. 3 long years had passed since the war, and he'd spent every day since trying to outride the ghosts that followed him from battlefield to battlefield. With $2.73 to his name, he pushed through the swinging doors of the town's bustling saloon, desperate for something to warm his blood besides the cheap whiskey he couldn't afford anymore. "Steele, you're late on your tab again," the bartender called out, his voice carrying over the piano's jangled tune. Kaleb brushed past a group of miners, his worn leather boots scuffing against the sawdust-covered floor. "Came to settle it, Hank. Got a job with the Morrison outfit starting tomorrow." The year was 1871, and independence, Montana was growing faster than most could keep track of. The Northern Pacific Railroad was pushing west, bringing with it opportunity and outsiders in equal measure. For a man like Kaleb, 32 years old with nothing but a good horse, a Colt revolver, and haunted blue eyes to his name, the frontier still offered what the East couldn't, a place to disappear. "Morrison, eh?" Hank's eyebrow arched as he wiped a glass with his apron. "Heard he's a hard man to work for. I've dealt with worse." Kaleb placed his coins on the counter, counting out what he owed. A man's drunken laughter erupted from a corner table, drawing Kaleb's attention. 5 men hunched over cards, and one of them, a weather-beaten fellow with a silver-streaked beard, was gathering his meager winnings. "Damn fool," one of the players muttered. "Taking your money based on fairy tales." The old man bristled, shoving a folded piece of paper into his pocket. "It ain't no fairy tale. Valley's real as you or me." "Then why ain't you rich instead of hustling card games, Silas?" Another player sneered. Kaleb might have turned away, might have forgotten the exchange entirely if not for the desperation in the old man's eyes as he fumbled with his winnings, dropping a few coins that rolled toward Kaleb's boots. He bent down, picking up the copper penny that had come to rest against his foot. "Here," he said, holding it out. Silas looked up, rheumy eyes assessing Kaleb with unexpected sharpness. "Obliged." He took the coin, but instead of pocketing it, he held it between gnarled fingers. "You look like a man who's searching for something. Aren't we all?" Kaleb replied, intending to walk away. "Some search in circles. Others need a map." The old man's voice dropped lower. "I got one that could change your fortune if you're the type to believe." Any other day, Kaleb would have dismissed him. But something in the way, Silas spoke not with a con man's slickness, but with the resignation of someone unloading a burden, made him pause. "What kind of map?" Silas glanced nervously at the other card players who were already deep into another hand. "One that leads to a valley. Hidden between the Bitterroot and the Sapphire Ranges. Place so green and fertile it'll make your eyes hurt after all this dust. Gold in the streams, game in the forests. If it's so wonderful, why sell the map?" The old man's face fell. "Too old to make the journey again. Nearly died last time." "And?" He hesitated, lowering his voice further. "There's stories about that place, sacred to the Indians, especially the Apache." Kaleb frowned. "Apache, this far north? Not many. Just one band far as I know. Led by a warrior who brought his people north after troubles down in Arizona Territory." Silas coughed into his fist. $3 for the map. Worth 100 times that if you're brave enough to follow it." It was a fool's bargain, and Kaleb knew it. $3 was nearly all he had left. But the Morrison job wouldn't start until tomorrow, and something in Silas's faded eyes spoke of truth, or at least a truth the old man believed. "Let me see it first." Silas pulled the folded paper from his pocket, opening it just enough for Kaleb to glimpse the careful lines, the landmarks noted with precision unusual for a prospector's rough sketch. It looked legitimate, at least as far as maps went. $3, Kaleb said finally, counting the coins from his dwindling supply. The exchange was quick. The map disappeared into Kaleb's coat, and Silas nodded once, as if passing on a sacred trust rather than selling a treasure map to a stranger. "May you find what you're looking for," Silas said, his voice suddenly solemn. "And may she find what she's been waiting for." Kaleb frowned. She. But Silas had already turned away, shuffling back to the card game as if their interaction had never happened. That night, in the cramped room above the livery stable where he'd traded labor for lodging, Kaleb spread the map across his knee by lamplight. It was more detailed than he'd initially thought, showing a route that wound through seldom traveled passes, following creeks that weren't on any official surveys he'd seen. The valley itself was marked with an X, naturally, but beside it, written in a shaky hand different from the one that had drawn the map, were the words, "Where Lone Hawk brought his people, where his daughter waits." Kaleb traced the route with his finger, estimating distances. It would be at least a week's ride, through difficult country. The Morrison job would be gone if he took that long. But something about the map pulled at him, not the promise of gold or game, but the mystery of it. Who was waiting? And why did Silas think Kaleb might be the one to find her? Morning came with a decision already made in his heart. Kaleb saddled his chestnut gelding, Thunder, before dawn, packing his meager supplies. Jerky, coffee, ammunition for his rifle and revolver, and a few trading goods. He left a note for Morrison explaining he'd been called away, knowing full well it meant burning a bridge in a town where he had precious few to begin with. The spring air was crisp as he rode west out of Independence, following the main trail until it was time to turn onto the smaller paths marked on Silas's map. By midday, he'd left civilization behind, the only sounds those of his horse's hooves and the occasional call of birds overhead. 5 days of hard riding brought him deep into territory few white men had explored. He crossed streams where his horse drank deeply of water so clear he could count the pebbles beneath the surface. He navigated passes where the wind whispered secrets in a language he couldn't understand. And he felt watched by what or whom, he couldn't say. On the morning of the 6th day, Kaleb crested a ridge and felt his breath catch in his throat. Below him lay a valley that seemed to have been painted by a more generous hand than the one that had created the harsh landscapes surrounding it. A river wound through its center like a silver ribbon, and meadows of spring wildflowers stretched toward forests of pine and aspen that climbed the valley walls. "I'll be damned," he whispered to Thunder, who snorted in seeming agreement. He made camp that night at the valley's edge, reluctant to enter such a paradise without proper reverence. As darkness fell, he noticed something that hadn't been visible in daylight, the faint glow of what might be fires, deeper in the valley's heart. People. The Apache that Silas had mentioned. Or perhaps other fortune seekers who'd heard the same tales. Morning brought caution as Kaleb descended into the valley proper. He moved slowly, alert for any sign of danger, but found only beauty at every turn. Game trails crisscrossed the meadows, and twice he spotted deer watching him with curious eyes before bounding away. When he stopped to let Thunder drink from a stream, he noticed the glint of something in the water and reached down to investigate. Gold. Not a large nugget, but unmistakable. Silas hadn't lied about that. By mid-afternoon, Kaleb had ventured deeper into the valley than he'd intended. The smell of smoke reached him before he saw its source, a small collection of dwellings nestled against a bluff. Some were traditional Apache wickiups, others more permanent structures of logs and stone. A fusion of cultures that spoke of adaptation and survival. He dismounted and ground tide Thunder, approaching on foot with his hands clearly visible. No point in surprising people who likely had every reason to distrust strangers. A dog's bark announced his presence before he could. Moments later, two men emerged from the camp, rifles raised. They wore a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and pieces that might have been traded from settlers, one in buckskins with a bandana around his neck, the other in wool pants and a faded calico shirt. "That's far enough," called the taller of the two in accented but clear English. Kaleb stopped, keeping his hands away from his weapons. "I mean no harm. Found this valley on a map, just exploring." The men exchanged glances. "A map?" the second man asked. "From where?" Man named Silas back in Independence. Another look passed between them, laden with meaning Kaleb couldn't decipher. "The old one with the silver beard," the first man said. It wasn't a question. Kaleb nodded. "That's him." The taller man lowered his rifle slightly. "What did he tell you about this place?" "That it was hidden. Sacred to the Apache. That there was gold." Kaleb hesitated, then added, "And that someone was waiting." The impact of his words was immediate and stark. Both men stiffened, and the taller one barked something in Apache to his companion, who turned and sprinted back toward the camp. "I am Joseph," the remaining man said, his voice tight with an emotion Kaleb couldn't identify. "You will come with me now." "Am I in danger?" Kaleb asked, not moving. Joseph's expression softened slightly. "Not from us. But why Silas sent you, that remains to be seen." Kaleb followed, leading Thunder by the reins. As they approached the camp, people emerged from the dwellings, women, children, a few elders. Their faces showed a mixture of wariness and curiosity, but not the hostility he might have expected. A woman stepped forward from the group. Unlike the others, who watched him with open suspicion, she looked at him as if she'd been expecting him specifically. She wore a dress of soft buckskin adorned with intricate beadwork, her long black hair braided with red cloth woven through it. She was beautiful in a way that transcended culture's high cheekbones, proud bearing, and eyes that held both wisdom and pain. "I am Liluye, Manitoba," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Daughter of Lone Hawk. You have his map." Kaleb blinked in surprise. "How did you?" "My father made it. For the one who would come." She held out her hand, palm up. "May I see it?" He reached into his coat and withdrew the folded paper, placing it carefully in her outstretched hand. Their fingers brushed, and he felt an unexpected jolt of connection pass between them. Liluye unfolded the map, tracing the lines with a reverence that suggested she was touching a piece of her father rather than mere paper. "He drew this before he died," she said softly. "Said a stranger would bring it back to me when the time was right." "I don't understand," Kaleb admitted. Silas didn't explain much. Her dark eyes met his. "Silas was my father's friend, one of the few white men he trusted." She refolded the map carefully. "Come, we will talk, and then you will decide if finding this valley was worth your $3. She led him to a dwelling larger than the others, built in a style that blended Apache tradition with frontier practicality. Inside, a fire burned in a central pit, its smoke rising to escape through a hole in the roof. Furs and woven blankets covered the packed earth floor, and various tools and personal items hung from the walls. "Sit," she said, indicating a place near the fire. "Are you hungry?" Kaleb realized suddenly that he was. "Yes, madam." The corner of her mouth quirked at his formality. "Just Liluye." She moved with practiced efficiency, preparing a simple meal of dried meat, berries, and a kind of bread Kaleb had never seen before. As she worked, he found himself studying her, the grace of her movements, the quiet strength in her hands, the way the firelight caught in her hair. "You're staring," she said without looking up. He felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "Sorry, just trying to understand how I fit into this story." Liluye placed a wooden bowl of food before him and sat across the fire, her own portion in her lap. My father was a great warrior. When I was a child, trouble came to our people in the south, fighting with the white army with other tribes. My father had a vision that told him to take those who would follow and travel north, to a valley hidden between mountains where we could live in peace. She gestured around them. 15 of us survived the journey. We found this place just as his vision had shown. For 10 years we have lived here, trading occasionally with friendly trappers but keeping our existence secret from most. And Sila's? Kaleb asked between bites of the surprisingly delicious food. He stumbled upon us 7 years ago, half dead from cold and hunger. My father saved his life, and in return, Sila's kept our secret. Her expression darkened. But before my father died 3 winters ago, he had another vision. He said a man would come, guided by the map he made, a man with war in his past but peace in his future. Kaleb's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. I fought in the war, yes, but I don't know about the peace part. Liluye studied him with those penetrating eyes. My father also said this man would save us from a danger we could not see coming. That is why I have waited. Wait, Kaleb set down his bowl. You've been waiting for me specifically. For 3 years, she shrugged, a surprisingly casual gesture given the weight of her words. Not you specifically, for whoever the map would bring. And what if I'd never come? What if Sila's had sold the map to someone else or lost it in a card game? My father's visions never failed, she said simply, as if that explained everything. Then, seeing his skepticism, she added, I did not sit idly by a window pining for a stranger, if that's what you're thinking. I have led our people since my father's death. But I knew someone would come, eventually. Kaleb ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. And this danger. Any idea what it might be? No, but things have been unsettled lately, game moving differently, strangers passing closer to our valley than ever before. She hesitated. And dreams. I have had dreams of fire and darkness. The conversation might have continued, but a commotion outside interrupted them. Liluye was on her feet instantly, moving to the entrance with Kaleb close behind. One of the younger men from the camp was riding in hard, his horse lathered with sweat. He called out in Apache, his voice urgent. Liluye's face hardened as she listened. She turned to Kaleb. Men are coming, many men with pack animals and equipment. They've made camp at the valley's eastern entrance. Prospectors, Kaleb guessed, perhaps, or worse. She gave swift instructions to several people who immediately began preparations that looked worryingly like those for conflict. To Kaleb, she said, "Will you help us?" He hesitated only a moment. Whatever mystery had brought him here, whatever strange prophecy Liluye believed in, he couldn't simply ride away from people who might be in danger. Especially not when one of those people looked at him with eyes that seemed to see into his very soul. "Yes," he said, "I'll help." Relief washed across her face, quickly replaced by determination. "Then let's go see who has found our valley." They rode out with 4 warriors from the Camp Joseph, among them, keeping to the cover of the trees as they made their way toward the eastern entrance. Kaleb felt an unfamiliar tension in his chest that had nothing to do with potential danger and everything to do with the woman riding beside him, straight-backed and focused. From a concealed position on a ridge, they observed the newcomers' camp. Kaleb counted 12 men, all heavily armed. Their equipment suggested mining pickaxes, shovels, sluice components, but they carried themselves like fighters more than prospectors. "Company men," Kaleb murmured to Liluye. "Probably working for one of the big mining outfits. They've got the look. How would they know about this place?" She asked, her voice tight with concern. Kaleb shook his head. "Word gets around, or maybe they're just exploring. Either way, they're not just passing through with that much equipment. They watched as the men set up a more permanent-looking camp, complete with a large tent that likely housed whoever was in charge. As if summoned by the thought, a man emerged from the tent, tall, expensively dressed, with a neatly trimmed beard and the confident bearing of someone used to giving orders. Beside him, Kaleb felt Liluye stiffen. "What is it?" he whispered. "I know that man," she said, her voice barely audible. "He came to our lands in the south, before we left. Thomas Blackburn. He worked for the government then, making treaties he never intended to honor." Kaleb studied the man with new interest. Blackburn was gesturing to the valley, pointing out locations to his men with the proprietary air of someone who already considered the land his own. "We need to get back," Liluye said abruptly. "Prepare our people." They retreated silently, but Kaleb's mind was racing. 12 armed men against a small community that included women, children, and elders was no kind of fair fight, even with his help. They needed a strategy that didn't involve direct confrontation. Back at the camp, Liluye called a council meeting in the central area. Kaleb was surprised to be included, but when he took his place in the circle beside her, it somehow felt right, as if he'd found a place he hadn't known he was looking for. Joseph spoke first, reporting what they'd seen. The discussion that followed was partly in Apache, partly in English for Kaleb's benefit. Opinions were divided. Some advocated for immediate relocation deeper into the mountains, others for sending a delegation to negotiate, still others for fighting to protect their home. Throughout it all, Liluye listened more than she spoke, her face revealing nothing of her thoughts. When everyone had been heard, she turned to Kaleb. "What do you say, map-bearer? You know more of men like Blackburn than we do." All eyes turned to him, and Kaleb felt the weight of their scrutiny. "Men like Blackburn understand only two things, power and profit," he said slowly. "If he's here with mining equipment, he believes there's enough gold to make it worth his while. He won't leave easily, and he won't negotiate honestly." "Then we fight," one of the older warriors said grimly. Kaleb shook his head. "Not directly. You'd be outnumbered and outgunned." He looked around the circle, an idea forming. "But what if we could make him think this valley isn't worth the trouble? What if we could scare him off?" Interest sparked in several faces, including Liluye's. "How?" she asked. "Apache warriors have a fearsome reputation," Kaleb said. "We use that. Make them think they're facing a much larger band. Hit their camp at night not to kill but to frighten. Take their supplies, spook their horses, make them believe the land itself is against them." A slow smile spread across Joseph's face. "Ghost warfare. My grandfather spoke of such tactics." Discussion erupted again, this time with energy rather than division. Plans began to take shape, strategies for creating the illusion of a larger force, for disrupting the miners' operations without direct confrontation that would lead to bloodshed. As the council broke up to begin preparations, Liluye touched Kaleb's arm. "Walk with me." She led him away from the camp, along a path that followed the river. The setting sun painted the valley in shades of gold and amber, highlighting its beauty in ways that made Kaleb's chest ache. This was indeed a place worth protecting. "Why are you helping us?" Liluye asked when they were alone. "You could have ridden away, told Blackburn about us in exchange for a share of whatever he finds here." Kaleb considered the question seriously. "I've seen what happens when people like Blackburn get their way, seen what it costs." He paused, searching for words. "During the war, I did things I'm not proud of, things that wake me in the night. Maybe helping you is a way to balance that scale, even a little." She studied him, those dark eyes seeming to look past his words to the truth beneath them. "And there is no other reason." His gaze caught hers, held it. "There might be," he admitted softly, but I'm not sure I have the right to speak of it yet." Something flickered in her expression, not quite a smile, but close. "My father's vision said the man who came would have truth in his heart, even when his words were few." She reached out, her fingers brushing his hand so lightly he might have imagined it. "Come, we have work to do." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Kaleb worked alongside the Apache, helping craft noisemakers that would sound like dozens of warriors moving through the forest, creating arrow traps that would threaten without killing, devising ways to make Blackburn's men believe they faced supernatural forces as well as human ones. During that time, he found himself growing closer to Liluye in ways that transcended words. They worked side by side, ate together, and in the evenings, she shared stories of her people while he spoke of places he had seen in his wandering years. He learned that she was 28, educated by a missionary before her people left the South, fluent in 3 languages, and possessed of a quiet humor that emerged when she was most comfortable. She learned of his Mississippi childhood, his reluctant service in a war whose cause never fully claimed his heart, and his restless searching since. Neither spoke of the growing connection between them, yet both felt it a tether forming, strand by invisible strand. On the night they planned to make their first move against Blackburn's camp, Kaleb found Liluye, preparing by the light of a small fire outside her dwelling. She was painting her face with streaks of black and red, traditional war colors of her people. "You're going yourself?" he asked, surprised. She nodded, not pausing in her work. "I am still a warrior of my people, even as their leader." She glanced up at him. "Does that trouble you?" "No," he said truthfully, "just makes me worry more." Her hands stilled, and she set down the small pot of paint. "Worry is the shadow of caring," she said quietly. "It has been a long time since anyone worried for me." Before he could respond to the vulnerability in her voice, Joseph approached, his own face already painted for battle. "It's time," he said. Their plan was simple but required precise timing. Kaleb would approach the miners' camp openly, claiming to be a lone prospector who'd heard rumors of gold. While he distracted them, the Apache would take positions surrounding the camp. At a signal, they would create an illusion of being attacked from all sides, noisemakers simulating movement through the forest, arrows fired to pin men down without hitting them, shadowy figures glimpsed briefly before disappearing. Kaleb rode in at dusk, deliberately making enough noise to announce his presence. As expected, he was met with raised rifles and suspicious faces. "Easy, boys," he called, hands raised. "Just another fool chasing color, same as you." He was escorted to Blackburn's tent at gunpoint. The mining boss was seated at a folding desk, examining papers by lamplight. He looked up as Kaleb entered, his eyes sharp with intelligence and cold calculation. "A visitor," Blackburn said smoothly, setting aside his work. "Unusual in such remote country." Kaleb shrugged, playing the part of a weathered prospector. "Heard rumors in Independence. Valley with gold so rich you could pluck nuggets from the streams like berries." "Independence, you say?" Blackburn's interest sharpened. "From whom did you hear these rumors?" "Old-timer named Silas. Sold me a map for $3. Kaleb grinned ruefully. "Probably fleeced me, but figured it was worth a look." "May I see this map?" Kaleb patted his pockets with a frown. "Lost it crossing a river a few days back. Been following landmarks since then." He glanced around the tent, noting the quality of Blackburn's equipment, the bottles of expensive liquor. "Looks like you came better prepared than me." Blackburn smiled thinly. "I represent investors who prefer to be thorough." He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, offering one to Kaleb. "Perhaps we could come to an arrangement. My men could use an experienced guide, and you could use our resources." Kaleb accepted the drink, using it as an opportunity to scan the camp through the open tent flap. He needed to keep Blackburn talking until full dark. "What kind of arrangement did you have in mind?" As Blackburn outlined a proposal that amounted to Kaleb doing the dangerous work while they reaped the rewards. Kaleb noted the positions of guards, the location of supply wagons, the horses in their makeshift corral. Everything was just as they'd observed, which meant their plan should work if he could get out of the tent at the right moment. An hour later, with darkness fully settled, Kaleb heard the first owl call their signal to begin. He yawned dramatically, stretching. "Mind if I step out for a moment?" "Nature calls." Blackburn waved permission, already turning back to his papers. Outside, Kaleb nodded to the guard who'd been assigned to watch him and walked toward the edge of camp. The guard followed at a discreet distance. The first arrows came silently, thudding into the ground at the guard's feet. The man jumped back with a curse, raising his rifle. Before he could fire, more arrows landed in a pattern around him, none striking him but all coming close enough to send him scrambling back toward the main camp, shouting an alarm. Chaos erupted precisely as they'd planned. From all sides came sounds of movement, snapping branches, rustling leaves, the distinctive calls that Apache warriors used to communicate in battle. Shadowy figures appeared briefly at the edge of firelight, then vanished before shots could be fired. Horses panicked in their corral, breaking free and stampeding through the camp, further adding to the confusion. Kaleb ducked behind a wagon, watching as Blackburn emerged from his tent, shouting orders that were lost in the din. Men fired blindly into the darkness, wasting ammunition on phantoms. Then came the masterstroke, dozens of small fires igniting simultaneously on the ridges surrounding the camp, giving the impression of a massive force encircling them. Kaleb had to admire the effect. Even knowing it was largely illusion, the sight was intimidating. In the confusion, he slipped away, joining Liluye and the others at their rendezvous point a safe distance from the camp. From there, they watched as Blackburn's men fought shadows until exhaustion and fear took their toll. "It's working," Joseph said with quiet satisfaction. "Look, they're pulling back, gathering around the main tent." Indeed, the miners had abandoned the outer portions of their camp, clustering defensively around Blackburn's tent and the supply wagons. No one ventured into the darkness to pursue their phantom attackers. "Phase 2. Liluye asked. Looking to Kaleb, he nodded. "Phase 2. While Blackburn's men huddled together, certain small items began to disappear from their camp. A canteen here, a hat there, personal possessions taken not for their value but for the unsettling message their absence would send. Meanwhile, other small, inexplicable occurrences added to the men's unease, finding their boots filled with river mud when they'd been dry moments before, hearing whispers in a language they didn't understand, discovering strange symbols carved into trees that hadn't been marked earlier. By dawn, the miners were sleep-deprived, paranoid, and jumping at shadows. When they ventured to check their first test dig sites, they found all traces of gold dust removed from their sluice boxes and replaced with ordinary sand. Watching through a spyglass from their hidden position, Kaleb saw Blackburn inspecting the sabotage, his face darkening with rage. The mining boss gathered his men, gesturing emphatically as he spoke. Though they couldn't hear the words, the message was clear. Blackburn was driving them to continue despite their fears. "He won't give up easily," Kaleb said, lowering the spyglass. "Men like him can't afford to fail. Their reputation depends on success." "Then we continue," Liluye said, determination hardening her voice. "Tonight, we take their food supplies." For 3 more nights they employed similar tactics, each time increasing the pressure. They avoided killing or seriously injuring anyone. Liluye was firm on this point, and Kaleb agreed. Their goal was to drive the miners away, not create a blood feud that would only bring more trouble later. By the fourth day, cracks were showing in Blackburn's operation. 2 men had deserted in the night, taking horses and supplies. Others argued openly, their nerves frayed beyond endurance. When their food cache was found not just stolen but replaced with rotting meat that drew a grizzly into camp, nearly resulting in a mauling, even the most stalwart began to question the wisdom of remaining. Only Blackburn seemed unmoved, his determination hardening into something dangerous. As Kaleb and Liluye observed him through the spyglass, taking turns watching the camp, they saw him examining a map, one that looked disturbingly familiar. "Is that," Liluye began. "Silas's map," Kaleb confirmed grimly. "Or a copy of it. He must have made more than one." She lowered the spyglass, her expression troubled. "If he has the map, he may know about our camp." Kaleb nodded. "We need to end this, and soon." That night, as they prepared for what they hoped would be their final push to drive out the miners, Kaleb found himself alone with Liluye by the river. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see her face clearly as she worked on a mixture of herbs and clay that would create thick smoke when thrown into a fire. "When this is over," he said, the question that had been haunting him finally finding voice. "What happens then?" Her hands stilled. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he struggled for words, "your father's vision. It said I would come to help with a danger. Once Blackburn is gone, does that mean my part in this story is over?" Liluye set aside her work and looked at him directly, her dark eyes reflecting the moonlight. "My father's vision said many things, not all of which I shared with you at first." She moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. "He said the man who came would carry a wounded heart that would begin to heal in this valley, that he would find a home he didn't know he was seeking." Kaleb's breath caught. "And what do you say? Not your father, not his vision. You, I say." She reached up, her fingers lightly tracing the line of his jaw. "I say that I have waited a long time, not knowing what I was waiting for until you appeared with my father's map in your hand." He caught her hand in his, held it against his face. "Liluye," a shout from the direction of their camp cut him off. They turned as one to see Joseph running toward them, his face urgent in the moonlight. "They're coming," he called. "Blackburn and his men, armed for war." All personal matters forgotten, they raced back to the camp. People were already preparing, gathering children and elders to a protected cave system they'd prepared as a refuge, warriors arming themselves. "How many?" Kaleb asked Joseph. 8. The others must have deserted or been left to guard their camp. Still too many for a direct fight, but the reduced numbers gave Kaleb an idea. "We need to separate them," he said quickly. "Draw them apart, deal with them individually." Liluye nodded, already thinking along the same lines. "The forest paths, we know them, they don't." "Exactly. And we use their fear against them." Kaleb turned to Joseph. "How long until they reach us?" "Less than an hour the way they're moving." They devised a hasty plan. The children and elders would go to the caves. The warriors would split into pairs, each taking responsibility for leading miners away from the main group and neutralizing them, not killing unless absolutely necessary, but disarming and restraining them. Kaleb and Liluye would handle Blackburn personally. As the others hurried to their positions, Liluye caught Kaleb's arm. "Be careful," she said, her voice low and intense. "Blackburn is more dangerous than the others. He has nothing to lose now." He covered her hand with his. "I will if you will." They moved out into the night, taking positions along the approach to the camp. Through the trees, they could see the miners coming, torches bobbing in the darkness, voices carrying in the still air. Blackburn led them, rifle in hand, his face set in lines of cold fury visible even at a distance. The plan worked better than they dared hope. One by one, miners were separated from the group, a noise drawing one away, a glimpse of movement enticing another to investigate. Within half an hour, only Blackburn and two others remained, growing increasingly uneasy as they realized their numbers were dwindling. "Stand together," Blackburn ordered, his voice carrying clearly. "It's what they want to pick us off one by one. Too late." His men were already on edge, jumping at shadows. When Joseph deliberately showed himself at the edge of their torchlight, then disappeared into the trees, one of the remaining miners broke ranks to pursue, ignoring Blackburn's shouted command to stay put. The other lasted only minutes longer before a similar tactic drew him away, leaving Blackburn alone, cursing furiously as he spun in a circle, rifle raised. "Show yourselves," he shouted into the darkness. "I know you're there, savages. This land will be mine one way or another." Kaleb stepped from the shadows, his own rifle pointed at Blackburn's chest. "That's not going to happen." Blackburn's eyes narrowed as he recognized him. "The prospector. Should have known you were with them." He kept his rifle trained on Kaleb. "One man won't stop me. My backers have resources you can't imagine. Even if you kill me, others will come." "Perhaps," Liluye said, emerging from the darkness behind Blackburn. "But you won't be here to see it." Blackburn whirled at the sound of her voice, momentarily disoriented by having opponents on two sides. It was the opening Kaleb needed. He rushed forward, driving his shoulder into Blackburn's midsection before the man could fire, sending them both crashing to the ground. The rifle went flying as they grappled in the dirt. Blackburn was surprisingly strong, his desperation lending him energy. He landed a solid punch to Kaleb's jaw that sent stars across his vision. But Kaleb had been fighting for his life since the war began, and some lessons were burned too deep to forget. He rolled with the blow, using Blackburn's momentum against him, and came up on top. 3 rapid punches left the mining boss dazed. As Kaleb pulled back for another strike, Liluye's voice stopped him. "Enough," she said firmly. "We don't need his blood on our hands." Breathing hard, Kaleb looked up to see her standing over them, bow drawn and aimed at Blackburn's heart. The certainty in her stance said she would fire if necessary, but the mercy in her voice reminded him of why he had come to admire her so deeply in such a short time. He nodded, climbing off Blackburn but keeping him pinned with a boot on his chest. "What do we do with him?" "Send him back to his investors with nothing to show for their money," Liluye said, her voice hard. "Let him explain his failure." Blackburn spat blood, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over. The railroad's coming. Development. Progress. You can't stop it, no matter how many ghosts you pretend to be." Kaleb increased the pressure of his boot. "Maybe not, but we can make sure you're not the one bringing it." He bent down, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And if you ever return to this valley, if you ever send others in your place, I will personally ensure that the only thing they find is your shallow grave. Am I clear?" Fear flickered across Blackburn's face for the first time, not of ghostly Apache warriors, but of the very real threat in Kaleb's eyes. He nodded jerkily. By morning, Blackburn and his men, disarmed, minus their boots to slow their travel, were escorted to the edge of the valley and sent on their way with a clear warning. The valley was protected by forces they couldn't hope to defeat. Whether they believed in Apache spirits or simply recognized they were outmatched didn't matter, so long as they carried the message back to whoever might think of following in their footsteps. Watching them go, a ragged line of defeated men trudging through the morning mist, Kaleb felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Beside him, Liluye stood straight and proud, the sun catching the red threads in her hair. "It's over," she said softly. For now, at least. He turned to her. And what comes next? Her eyes met his, and he saw in them the same question that had been haunting him since their interrupted moment by the river. That depends, she said, on whether you intend to stay. The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Around them, the valley stretched in all its spring glory, more beautiful in the morning light than any place Kaleb had ever seen. But it wasn't the land that called to him now, it was the woman standing before him, waiting for an answer that would shape both their futures. I've been running for a long time, he said slowly. From the war, from myself, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. He reached out, taking her hand in his. But I'm tired of running, and for the first time in years I've found someone worth staying for. The smile that bloomed across her face was like sunrise after the longest night. My father's vision said you would bring peace, she said, her fingers tightening around his. I didn't understand until now that he meant peace for both of us. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been before. Her lips were soft against his, her body fitting perfectly against him as he pulled her closer. Around them, the valley seemed to hold its breath, witnessing the beginning of a story that had been written long before either of them knew it existed. The days that followed were filled with a joy Kaleb had forgotten could exist in the world. He worked alongside the Apache, learning their ways, sharing his own knowledge. He built a cabin near Liluye's dwelling. Though they both knew it was mostly for appearance's sake, he spent his nights with her, learning the contours of her body as intimately as he was learning the geography of the valley that had become his home. 2 months after Blackburn's departure, on a warm summer evening with fireflies dancing above the river, Kaleb asked Liluye to be his wife. They were married in a ceremony that blended Apache traditions with the simple vows Kaleb remembered from his childhood. Joseph served as witness, along with the entire community that had come to accept Kaleb as one of their own. As summer gave way to fall, and fall to the crisp beginnings of winter, Kaleb found himself thinking often of Sila's and the $3 that had changed his life. He wondered if the old man had known what he was setting in motion when he sold the map, if he had somehow been part of Lone Hawk's vision all along. One snowy morning in December, as Kaleb returned from checking traps with Joseph, he found Liluye waiting for him with news that completed the circle of their story. I am carrying your child, she told him, her eyes shining with a happiness that matched the soaring of his own heart. A son, I think. My father's vision included this as well, that the man who came would continue the line of Lone Hawk through his daughter. Kaleb gathered her in his arms, overwhelmed by the gift life had given him: a home, a purpose, a love that had healed the wounds of his past, and now, a future extending beyond himself. That night, as they lay together beneath furs and blankets, listening to the winter wind outside their warm dwelling, Liluye traced the lines of his face with gentle fingers. You ever regret it? She asked softly. Spending your last $3 on an old man's map. Kaleb caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Best investment I ever made, he murmured against her skin. Though I'm still not sure if I found this valley or if it found me. She smiled in the firelight, pulling him closer. Perhaps both, she whispered. Perhaps we were always meant to find each other, across all the miles and years. And as snow fell softly outside, blanketing the hidden valley in pristine white, Kaleb Steele, once a restless wanderer, now a man anchored by love, knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found the peace he'd been seeking since the first gunshot of the war had shattered his youth. In Liluye's arms, in the community that had accepted him, in the child growing beneath her heart, he had found not just a place to stay, but a place to belong. when spring came again to the valley, bringing with it the rebirth of green and growing things, Liluye gave birth to a son they named Koda. Friend in the Dakota language, a nod to the friendship between peoples that had brought them together. The boy had his father's blue eyes and his mother's black hair, a living symbol of the bridge their love had built between worlds. As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter, Naeli, joined them 2 years after Koda, and another son, William, 3 years after that. The community thrived under Liluye's leadership, occasionally trading with trusted outsiders, but largely maintaining their sanctuary from a world that was changing rapidly beyond the mountains that protected them. Kaleb found purpose he'd never expected, not just as husband and father, but as a guardian of the valley and its people. He taught his children to ride, to hunt, to respect both of their heritages. He watched them grow strong and sure, free from the shadows that had haunted his own youth. When Koda was 7, he asked about the map that had brought his father to the valley. Kaleb took him to the ridge where he had first looked down upon the paradise that would become his home, and told him the story of an old man named Silas, $3 spent on faith, and a vision that had guided 2 lost souls to each other. "Will I find a map someday?" Koda asked, his young face solemn with the importance of the question. Kaleb ruffled his son's hair, smiling at the earnestness in those blue eyes so like his own. "Maybe not a paper one," he said, "but I believe there are maps in all our lives, son. Some we can see, some we can only feel. The trick is learning to read them." On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Kaleb presented Liluye with a gift he'd been working on in secret, a detailed map of their valley, drawn with all the care and precision he could muster, marking not just the physical features, but the places that held special meaning for them. The spot where they'd first kissed, the meadow where they'd been married, the stand of aspens where they'd often go to be alone together. "So our children will always know their way home," he said as she traced the lines with the same reverence her father had shown in creating the original map. That night, as they lay beneath the stars on a blanket spread near the river where it all began, Liluye spoke of something that had been on her mind. "The world beyond our mountains is changing," she said, her head resting on his chest. "The railroad comes closer each year. More settlers push west. Someday, our hidden valley won't be hidden anymore." Kaleb tightened his arm around her, knowing the truth of her words. "What do you want to do?" She was silent for a long moment, listening to the river's song. "I want our children to be prepared for that world, not hiding from it. I want them to be proud of both their bloodlines, to walk in both worlds if they choose. That won't be easy," he said gently. "Few things of value are." She raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "But if a cowboy and an Apache woman can find love in a hidden valley, perhaps there's hope for the larger world as well." He smiled, touching her cheek. "When did you get to be so wise?" "I've always been wise," she replied with mock severity. "You were just too stubborn to notice at first." Their laughter mingled with the night sounds of the valley, the whisper of aspen leaves, the occasional call of an owl, the constant murmur of the river that had witnessed their story from the beginning. 20 years after Kaleb first rode into the valley with a map purchased for $3, Independence, Montana had grown into a proper town. The Northern Pacific Railroad had indeed come, bringing changes both good and bad to the region. But the hidden valley remained largely as it had been, protected not by secrecy anymore, but by legal deed and the reputation of the formidable family that called it home. Kaleb, silver now threading his hair, occasionally rode into town for supplies and news. On one such trip, he stopped at the cemetery on the town's outskirts, as had become his custom. There, beneath a simple marker, lay Silas, who had died peacefully in his sleep the winter after sending Kaleb on his journey, as if his final task had been completed. "Thank you, old friend," Kaleb said quietly, placing a small gold nugget on the grave marker, a tradition he'd maintained for 2 decades. "For the map, for everything." As he turned to leave, he noticed an old man watching him from nearby, a stranger with a weathered face and eyes that held a familiar, lost look. The man nodded in acknowledgement, then hesitantly approached. "Pardon me, sir," he said, his voice rough with age and hard living. "I don't suppose you'd know where a man might find honest work around here." Kaleb studied him for a moment, seeing echoes of his younger self in the man's restless stance and guarded expression. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew a carefully folded paper. "I might have something better," he said, holding out the map he'd prepared for just such an occasion. "If you've got $3 and a mind for adventure." The old man's eyes lit with a spark of hope as Kaleb began to explain about a valley, not far from here, where a community of mixed heritage welcomed those willing to work hard and respect the land. Where second chances were given freely, because everyone there understood the value of finding your way home, even when you hadn't known you were lost. As they rode together toward the valley, Kaleb thought of how a single choice $3 spent on what should have been a fool's errand had created ripples that continued to spread, changing not just his life, but the lives of everyone he touched. He thought of Liluye, now a respected leader whose wisdom was sought by people from both worlds. Of their children Coda, now training to be a doctor in Boston but always returning home, Nayeli, who taught in the Valley School, and William, who had his mother's gift for bridging cultures. And he knew, with the certainty that comes from a life fully lived, that some maps showed more than just the way forward, they showed the way to becoming who you were always meant to be. In the hidden valley that spring, as it had for 23 years, the river continued its ancient song. Flowers bloomed in meadows where children played, and Liluye Manitoa Steele waited for her husband to return home, not with the desperate hope of a young woman fulfilling a vision, but with the settled confidence of one who had found, and been found, exactly as she was meant to be. When Kaleb crested the final ridge, the valley opening before him just as it had that first time, the sight still took his breath away, not just for its beauty, but for all it represented. A chance taken, a prophecy fulfilled, a love that had proven stronger than prejudice, distance, or time itself. And as he rode down into the valley, leading a man who carried his own burdens and hopes, Kaleb smiled at the knowledge that some stories never truly end, they simply continue, flowing like the river, connecting past to future in an endless, miraculous current of possibility.